Hey there! Welcome to this video. We're learning more about FileMaker Pro. You're a FileMaker learner and I'm a FileMaker teacher. My name is Matt Petrowski, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at FileMaker's relationships. So hang in there, we'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so what do we have for today? For today, we're taking a look at FileMaker's relationships. I'm using a copy of FileMaker 16 as I shoot this video. If you'd like to follow along, then please do so. We're going to head up to the File menu, and I'm going to choose the new solution for today. And the new solution is going to allow us to play with and learn FileMaker's relationships. Now in the previous video to this one, I'm going to look off screen here as I bring this one on screen and I create a file, and I'm just going to call mine relationships. If you'd like to follow along, and I'll click save down here. That'll save the file and bring up FileMaker's dialog box where we've already learned about the managed database and so forth and the relationships. Now we're going to have to create something really quickly in order for us to have relationships. And I'm just going to create a couple of different tables. FileMaker, you can see it automatically names the first table the same thing as you call the file. So we're going to need to rename that. I'm going to call this people and change that. And then let's see, what will we relate to? Let's relate to events. I don't know, this is a common thing that I do here. So I'm creating a second table called events. So if you're following along, I'll give you a little bit of time to create that. So we've got the two tables now of people and events, and we're going to be learning about this information. Now, of course, we need some information in these. I'm going to put in a very minimal set of defaults in the fields. My first is always an ID field. I'm going to go a little bit quick here in terms of going into these values, but you can follow along as you do here. We're just setting things up. Get UUID. So I already have an ID field in this one table. I'm now going to I'm not going to take the time to create another one. I'm just going to copy this with Command or Control C, go over to events, and just paste it. Once I have something in FileMaker that is pretty much structured the way that I want it, so much easier to copy and paste than just repeat yourself. So in people, I am going to need a name field, and then I'm also going to create a category field right there, because I'm going to categorize these people, and we'll eventually break these items down. Then in my events table, I'm going to have just a simple name. Now, here's an interesting thing, something that I do. I've explained this in my previous videos. One of the things that I do is I take the time to think about what a field is going to be named as it's going to be named. Just keep zooming in and out there. Sorry about that. When I come across it when I'm coding within the scripts and within my calculations. So for me, if I already have a table occurrence called events, I really don't want to say event name. That's a little extra for me. So I keep things really simple. Within the events table, I just have a simple field called name. Within the people table, I have a simple field called name, because in the rest of FileMaker, it's going to end up looking like events name or people name. So it just sort of makes sense, and it keeps it really simple. Easy to follow along. All right, so have I created that field? I did create the event name. All right, there's one other thing we're going to need in this events table. Obviously, in order to make the connection with a relationship between the people table and the actual event that they're going to be attending. Now, ultimately, what we would have here is a join file scenario, but we're going to learn about that in an upcoming lesson. We're just doing it really simple here. I'm going to need a foreign key. So that, of course, is going to be called ID people. So the first thing I should point out here is this structure that we're creating according to what I'm setting up here with these two tables of people and events is not how you would actually structure a database. We're just learning about FileMaker's relationship. So what you see here, don't take this as, this is how I should set up a database where people are attending events. The actual data structure will be different, but we're learning about those relationships. All right, we should be able to set things up now within the relationship graph. Now we can see that FileMaker has already created 2 table occurrences for us. Again, it's a very key thing to recognize and understand in all of FileMaker that what we see on the relationship graph really doesn't necessarily, oops, I accidentally held down the Option key. That's a little shortcut that you can make if you don't have the note selected, since we learned about notes yesterday. If you hold down Option, it actually creates that note for you. But as I get rid of these, and there is absolutely nothing on my graph, please recognize that that does not make the tables go away. The tables are still there. So my tables are sort of separate from what FileMaker automatically creates in the graph. It's a little bit elusive, I think is the word that I'm looking for, in that the graph can be completely empty and you can still have and collect data in your solution. Although it's sort of hard to do that because in order to view the data, you have to have at least one layout tied to at least one table occurrence. So here is the key fundamental we want for this video. This graph is just a representation of the things that you want to have happen in your solution. It is not a representation of the structure that you're applying within your, well, I shouldn't say of the structure. You are applying structure by using the graph, but let's just go through the example that I'm trying to show you here. We're going to obviously need to put people back, and I'm going to put events back, and we're going to make a connection between those with the relationship. And we'll learn very quickly what I mean by this not being a representation of what's going on. Now, when we connect this, we're going to connect our primary key to our foreign key. This is the primary key for people. This is the primary key for events. We would not connect the primary key to the primary key. Whenever you're connecting one table to another table, it's typically from a primary key to a foreign key. And you create foreign keys as needed. So what's going to happen here is each person can add unlimited number of events. In fact, unlimited people can create unlimited number of events. Now, the first thing we're learning about the relationship is these little, what happens with these little indicators right here. Now, these little indicators, there's pretty much 3 of them. You're going to see the little stop sign, which we've covered in a previous video, where that, I think of it as the stop sign, but it's basically just looks like the pipe character. That's going to be typically coming from a particular field that does not have an index, and it's usually a global field or an unstored calculation. That, for the most part, is a one-way relationship. Now, the next relationship that we'll have is it'll just be coming straight out without the little crow's feet that we see right there. And that would be called a one-to-many relationship. So you would have just straight out, and it would go over to another table, and you may have many. If it comes straight out and goes straight into another table occurrence, then it's a one-to-one relationship. Now, those are a little more rare, and you have to be intentional about setting them up. It's beyond the scope of this video, but it is something that you can do. Typically, you're going to have either a one-to-many or a many-to-many connection. Those are the most common. Now, here's the cool thing about FileMaker. You don't have to worry about knowing how to actually set up a many-to-many, a one-to-many, a many-to-one, a one-to-one. All of the relationships are taken care of for you by FileMaker. It basically comes down to the fields that you choose or the settings that are on the field, then FileMaker determines what type of relationship it's going to be. Now, we always have options when we're working with FileMaker. Well, I shouldn't say always, but many times we have options, and each relationship has multiple different settings or options that you can put on the relationship. Here is where we get into this notion of, these I believe are called predicates. I forget if I remember. I never really studied a whole lot the actual terminology to use. I just sort of understand how it works. This right here is our connection. If I think about it long enough, I'll probably remember the terminology to use it, but I do know what these are named when you use them. And these are basically the types of joins when you join 2 tables together via your relationship. The most common by far is the default and the very first one, which is called an equijoin. So that just means that both things need to be or are going to be equal on both sides of the relationship. That's because you can have a value on one side of a relationship within one table and nothing actually exists in the other table until you create it. And so at the point in time that you create it, then it will be equal between the two. Conversely, you can have a non-equijoin. Now, a non-equijoin is really interesting because it means that whatever is on one side of a relationship in one table, you're going to show everything that does not equal what that particular item is. It's not used as frequently, but there are occasionally uses where you can put it into play. For example, when we have a portal that we add to our layout, it's the only way that we can visualize related data is pretty much via a portal. We can have a situation where we want to see all other people except for the record that we're actually on. We would be able to use a non-equijoin. Now, the rest of them are pretty straightforward except the one down at the bottom. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time because hopefully you've taken basic math and you understand greater than and less than. And then you have the greater than equals to or less than equal to. I actually may be confusing these. Let's see. If you hold up your hands, for me, it's probably like this. I know that if you use if you hold out the signs, hopefully one of them's coming out. My left hand, if you put your left hand out in front of you, this is how I learned it, and the sign, and you put the two fingers out, then that is the less than version. So this one in particular is the less than. I believe I'm correct. And this one is the greater than. I always confuse the two. I think many of us do. But if it's got the line underneath it, it's the equal to. Now, when do you use these? Well, these are most commonly used whenever through a relationship, the data that you want to see is based on a range. And that's based on, you've got your starting and your ending. You can either have it intra-range or you can have it outside of the range. It just depends on the direction that you use the greater than and less than. Most commonly, these are used with dates, and if you have a database that needs it, date times or just times. Now, this one down at the bottom is what's known as a Cartesian product. And this one, you don't really have to understand a whole lot about group sets and set mathematics. You just need to understand that a Cartesian product is basically just give me everything. That's how I think of it. Some people call this a cross join. It basically, anytime that you set this, it just means that across this relationship, you're going to show all records for the most part. So I think of this as the everything relationship, greater thans and less thans, equijoin and non-equijoin. So it's basically just three sets. This is the first set, equals or not equals. The second set is range-based with your greater than, less thans. And then the third one is the show me everything. And that's basically how I think about this. Now, the additional options that we have in this dialog box is the fact that everything can be equal or not equal, or equal and greater than, or less than, or equal, and for the most part, you can combine all of these up at the top. You can combine all of these and have multiple predicates. Now, each of these items down here, these predicates, which are basically, I think it's the whole thing is called the predicate, because you can have multiple of them on a relationship. Just think of them this way. They're basically saying, these are the conditions upon which I want you to return data. This needs to be equal, and this needs to be greater than, and this needs to be less than. So you can obviously add as many of these as you want. So say, for example, this is hypothetical, but in this scenario, I'm going to say, in order for data to be shown on this layout, whatever the ID is in the people table, it has to be equal to all of the IDs in the events table. And then I can say, and the name also needs to be equal as well. And I just add that. So you can see that what I've done is I've got multiple predicates now, and each of these predicates just adds to the conditions that must be met in order for the data to be returned. So because of that, we can fine tune and basically get exactly what we want out of a relationship. So here is the next key point. You can obviously create as many relationships as you need in order to show as many different sets of data that you want to show. If a portal isn't showing what you want to show, or if the portal is showing what you want to show, but you want to show data in another way, you're just going to create another table occurrence and another relationship. Now be careful, because the more table occurrences and the more relationships you have and the types of data that you're displaying through those relationships using a portal, those can they accumulate. Everything in FileMaker is cumulative, and it all tends to add up. So if things start to get slower and slower, it's because of a few factors. FileMaker is having to do a lot of things, and of the data that it's trying to show, if a lot of it's unstored data, that's where things start to get a little bit slower. So say, for example, I wanted to change this. I was working with dates. I don't have a date field right now currently, but if I wanted to change this and say I had a greater than and less than, and I wanted to use this same situation and let's say add another one, look at that. I've got multiple predicates. So in this scenario, this doesn't make sense because I have a name field, but let's pretend that it's a date field for the purpose of example here. I would have an ID needs to be equal to people, and I would be showing data within a given range. If this was a date field, I'd be saying if the date was, on this side, I say the year was 2016, and then this year was 2017. And remember, these could come from global fields, and global fields would be global, but they would be local only to the user. So if I was creating a relationship here and I wanted this user, while they're logged in to their copy of FileMaker, and I used a global field of date, then this would pull information out for all people that had information between those 2 years. So it's a really cool, powerful thing that you can do. All right, let's move on. Down here at the bottom of the dialog, we have these settings for events. Now you can see that what happened is this turned off. It became gray, this allow creation of records in this table via this relationship. But the delete did not, and the sort is not as well. So let's investigate these settings right here. Watch what happens when we take this off. Let's delete this predicate, and let's delete this predicate. And notice that this just became available now. Now, FileMaker has these settings on both sides of the relationship. We can see, I don't think my head's covering that, but we'll move it just in case. We can see that we have it on this side of the relationship, and we also have it on this side of the relationship. This implies that the ability to either create or delete things is directional in terms of the context upon which the user is actually viewing data. So again, if you've not taken the time to understand what context is merely the layout that the user is on, whatever table occurrence it's tied to, that is the context and the perspective of what that particular layout can see. So if I was on a layout that was using the people table occurrence, its context or its viewpoint would be from people to events. Now, if I double-click the relationship and I turn on the allow creation of records in this table, that means that from the people table, if I'm on that table or on a layout tied to this table occurrence, I would be allowed to create new events. I would not, if I was on a layout based on events, be able to create new people until I turned on the allow creation in that direction. So this would be a bi-directional creation of people can create events and events could create people. So that's how that works. Now again, notice that when I have those multiple predicates on, where the multiple predicates serve the purpose of being able to extract or filter the data, those options become unavailable because they really wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense that if we were using my scenario here of if this was a date field instead of a name field, it wouldn't make sense that I would be able to create a new person that only existed between the year 2016 and 2017. It just doesn't make sense. I would either be able to create a person or not. And that's really only going to be based on the equijoin. Now this last option, or this next option that we have here, is really pretty interesting. And it's going to lead me to a key point that you absolutely need to understand about the graph, and these settings in particular. This setting of delete related records is what's known as a cascading delete. Well, a cascade actually means you're going to have multiple deletes between multiple relationships when you have many tables connected together. This is just basically a delete related record. So what this is saying right here is when I choose this option on this side of the relationship, remember context, I'm basically saying from the context of people, when I delete a person with this particular ID, I want you to delete all related records for this particular that have been assigned to this person. So all of the events that were assigned to this person, I want those events to go away because of this checkbox. Now here is a very important lesson about this setting in particular. Delete does not have to be assigned to the table occurrences where you're actually going to be working with the data. This is a very common misconception about this setting in particular, delete. It also applies a little bit to allow, but we can take a look at this and I can prove my point. I'm going to turn that off right there, and we're going to go now work with data. I haven't turned any, we'll turn on the allow creation. So from people, let's allow people to create events, and we'll click OK, and we'll go play with our data, and I can show you what I'm talking about in terms of the misconception. All right, so we have, by default, one record that's created. It's got our ID. Now, of course, if we want to see any related data, we're going to need a portal. So I'm going to go into layout mode, select my little portal tool, and actually add that. I'm going to select the table occurrence that is related, events. I'm not going to choose any of these options for right now. We're going to say browse. What we're going to do is we're going to expose the name field coming from the events. So it's telling me these are the available fields from the events. My current context is people. So I'll say I want to be able to create a new event name. Really simple what we have here. So I've got a name of a person, a category, and then a name. All right, we'll go into browse mode. I don't want to save, and we will create some records. Actually, let's just give some records. So I'm going to put in myself, and I'll create a new record. Gets a new UUID, and I'll just be really generic with Bob Smith. Now, FileMaker's portals have a little bit of an annoying feature, and that is when you have that option set, we're going to jump right back to the relationship. When you have this option set of allow creation of related records, a long time ago, FileMaker chose to have this option of the last row is actually the row that's going to allow you to create records. Now, we're going to see this because we're going to go into layout mode. We're going to select a little button here, and we're going to basically say, we're going to give it a little trash can icon, and I'm going to choose a single step, and that single step is going to be, I'm going to start to type in delete portal row. You can see that option. We have multiple deletes in terms of options, but I'm just going to say this trash can button icon allows me to delete the portal row. And I'm going to drag that into this row. Actually, I'm going to resize this and give myself a little bit more space. All right. Now here's the annoying thing about FileMaker's that option of allow creation of related records. It allows me to create the record, to start to type it in, and it will create it for me, but this makes no sense. Why is there a trash icon for something that doesn't exist and I cannot delete? It's just an unfortunate nuance of FileMaker Pro and how they've implemented things. If you want to avoid this on the last row, where the last row is treated as the record creation row, you can get rid of this. Let me show you how. We're going to go into layout mode. I'll zoom out here. You're going to have to hide anything that you don't want shown when that particular related record doesn't exist. So FileMaker's treating this last row as the record creation row, but it still shows this. I don't want to see it. We're going to go to the fourth area of the inspector. We're going to choose this option of hide object when. It's the calculation. We're going to put in a super simple calculation right here. We're basically just going to say something that actually makes sense. we're just going to put, well, here's Boolean logic for you. A lot of new FileMaker developers will put in this right here. They'll put in if, because it's a condition. If, and then they'll say is empty, looking at the events table, because that's what this portal is based on, the ID. So if the ID field is empty on this last row, then we would result in a result. What's the result? Well, remember down at the bottom it says calculation result must be Boolean, and we have to remember what's the question. The question is, do I want to hide this? 1 for yes, 0 for no, or what I suggest is put true or false. Answer the question. The question here is, if the event ID or the ID in the events table is empty, do I want to hide this? True, yes I do. Otherwise, false, I don't. But guess what? You don't have to do all of that. The results of is empty ID is in its own nature a true result. So this is either true or false. So this is what happens when you become a more advanced developer. You start to read and understand code in the context of Boolean logic. So basically, you're answering the question. Do I want to hide this? Yes, I want to hide it if it's empty. And you can flip this on its head by simply saying not is empty. So in this case, I'm saying if the ID is empty, which true it should be, then I want you to hide that little trash can. So now when we go into browse mode, there, the trash can's not actually showing on that last row because the last row doesn't exist because the ID doesn't exist. So we solved that problem that FileMaker has. But I'm able to add my related records or my related data. So let's call this an event of DevCon 2016 or 2016. And there, now the trash can makes sense. Now let's go DevCon 2017. All right, so let's get back to that issue that I was talking about. That's the confusing point that a lot of users have about the settings that are on relationships on the graph, the delete in particular. So I've created these records for Bob Smith. And we're going to need to see this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layout really quickly here. Actually, we'll use the events layout. I've opened the manage layouts. I did that within the manage and I went to this option, layouts, showed that. I'm going to click on this open button so that I can see the actual data. I'm going to open that. I'm going to now click on the table view, which is going to allow me to see the data as it's being created. Perfect. That's what I want to see. All right, so that we don't get confused, I'm going to actually create some records on my records. So I'll put DevCon 2018, and then I'll put DevCon 2019. All right, so we can see the data was actually populated in the back, and I can see if I drag my key value here, that according to the keys, and I read keys in this way, 9E, 9B is right there, and that is associated to 9E, 9B. Perfect. Matt has these two, and Bob has these two. So here's the takeaway that we have for the graph for today. The graph and its settings on relationships are particular in context only to the allow and the sort. It does not apply to the delete. And here's why. We are going to set up a separate table occurrence where context it doesn't even factor into our equation, but records will still be deleted. And it's an organizational technique that you can use because your graph becomes more and more complex. And FileMaker doesn't give us any information about the graph. I wish they did. And here's a little tip that I actually do myself every once in a while. I'm going to select the little note tool. And this is something that I believe FileMaker should do. I'm just going to put the little plus sign. And I'm going to make this color green. And I will make the color of the text white. And I'm going to make the size, let's say 24 may be a little big. And I'll select Arial Black, a really big font. And then I will size this down and make it really small. Maybe I'll even take the time to put a space in front of it, and I've got the little plus there. All right, so all I'm doing here is I'm giving myself a visual indication of what's going on with this relationship, because FileMaker's graph tells me nothing. Hey, FileMaker, if any of you are watching this and you do have the time and you're an engineer, I actually know a few of them, let's make the graph better. Let's make the graph more informative. Let's let users know what are the settings on the graph without having to go into the dialog, double click it. Oh, allow creation is on this side, delete, sort, and so forth. Because otherwise, what it would look like is if I had a delete, I might make a copy of this, and then I might take the time to say this is a minus and make it red. And so now this would mean that this graph has these two settings on right here. But we're not going to do that because we want to see that the delete option actually has nothing to do with the actual relationship that we're actually using. The only two that do are the allow creation and the sorting of that relationship. Because we're going to take these two table occurrences, we're going to hold down the option key and take a separate copy of them. And we're going to name this people delete, and then we're going to call this one events delete. We are on this relationship going to turn off the allow creation and turn on the delete related records. Now here is what most FileMaker, new FileMaker learners actually think. Records within events will only be deleted if the user's on a layout on people if the delete was set onto this relationship. That is not the case. What the case is anywhere where there is a relationship that is the same type of relationship and the delete exists on that relationship, it's still going to apply. Our context that we are working in is this table occurrence. We're on a layout tied to this table occurrence, and we are going to delete a record. And watch what happens as this set of table occurrences actually control and say, I found a delete on this set of table occurrences. I'm going to delete the related records. All right, I'm going to go to Bob Smith. I'm going to click the delete related records and watch what happens in our table of data right here to Bob's records. Our context isn't even tied to those table occurrences. We click delete and his records are gone. So here's my suggestion about the relationship graph. The relationship graph is something that you can treat with regards to how you want to structure and see your data, but it's also an organizational tool. It is not so much in that the settings on the table occurrences that you actually use actually apply within that context. I've just shown you a prime example that you can have as many different groups of table occurrences connected together in order to facilitate your solution. And doing so, you can make your solution much easier to understand by pulling some of the attributes of how your solution works out within the graph. For example, that is how I actually manage my graph. I'm going to switch over to the invoices solution that I've been using and evolving and show you typically what I do. In my solution, the core of my solution are these table occurrences right here, where that's the core. These are for my user interface, and I want to know that on my graph. But because FileMaker also lacks showing those abilities or showing all of the different settings, I would probably put little plus icons on the side of the relationship in order to come into this graph and instantly know, okay, which relationships allow creation and which ones allow sort. By the way that I actually indicate sort is I use an S. So that's a space S, and then I typically use, I think I use orange. I don't have as many of those. Let's go to Arial. I'll type really quickly, black, and we'll just say, I want that to be white. There we go. So typically this is what I do in terms of shrinking this down and making it as small as I can. If there is something on the relationship, I will have this one's plus, minus, etc. But then separately, I will have a separate set of table occurrences where I create the same relationship. Now again, remember one of the tricks that I do here is I can't see ID and I don't want to scroll down. So I'm just going to just drag these two arbitrarily, any two, just drag them. Then double click the relationship, and then once you're in that dialog, I can select ID and then ID invoices, I think is what it is. Yeah, is that an invoices table or ID people? Let's see, I think that's right. Add that right there. Oops, I wanted to delete that one and then delete related records. I'm going to turn delete on this separate connected table occurrences. I will highlight both of these. I will go down to my color and I will set them to red. This is how I actually manage my cascading deletes. All of my delete operations, if I'm going to turn them on, are separated out from the rest of my graph. Now your question may be, okay, Matt, but does that slow the performance or does it, what's the impact? There's no impact. There's little, if any, impact. The only impact that FileMaker has would be on startup. When your FileMaker file initially loads, FileMaker has to scan this entire chart, and it scans the whole graph and has to read and understand all of the different rules. So all it does is it scans these two table occurrences. It realizes that one of the rules is when an invoice is deleted, delete all of its associated items. But because this particular table occurrences, these table occurrences are not used for the purpose of a layout or for a value list or for going anywhere or for anything to do with the user, it's basically just sitting here for the purpose of me to be able to visually break out of the graph and be able to see instantly, okay, when I delete from invoices, line items is going to delete. Now, I usually make this inferior to this particular item so that I know that from invoices to line items, I come into this graph and I can instantly see, I get an indication with my little plus right here that, yeah, this is probably a plus, and I can see, okay, invoices can create line items. I also have a sort on the relationship. That might be a little bit of an impact. Maybe I want to use a portal sort. We'll get into that. And when it comes to my cascading deletes, or what happens when I delete an invoice, well, I'm going to look at my red table occurrences right down here. And if I delete an invoice, then I'm going to be deleting line items as well. And so that is our takeaway for today's lesson, is basically this graph, some of the settings do apply to context. I have to be on this layout, and if I want to create related records, this relationship has to have this option turned on. This gets turned off and is now managed by that separate table occurrences down here. This, if I want to sort on the relationship, has to be turned on the relationship between the two that are connected that I'm using for the purpose of my layouts. And these allow me to go bi-directional if I need to go both directions. Now, where you put your layouts or which table occurrences you tie your layouts to, whether you use a pure anchor buoy and only the layouts are down on one side, or whether you make layouts within the actual connected table occurrences, actual layouts, which is what I do because I like the bi-directional nature, that's up to you and how you design your solution. I'm sure we'll get into that more as we evolve this database a little bit as we go through the series, but I want to get to the questions. If you have any questions, this is a great time to ask them. Let's go ahead and set this to gray or back to whatever gray it was. I don't know if it's a mid-gray. I'll have to just set them all there, but that's basically our lesson for today about relationships. I hope I've been able to explain how these work. When you get into the notion of multiple predicates, that's when you're going to know that you want to extract the data that you want to see within portals. And then the rest of the user interface will just fall into place. You'll use pop-ups or drop-downs or buttons or button bars above portals, and you can make the portals, one given portal that displays something, let's say between 2016 and 2017, you can make it switch to show 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, or give the user the ability to see whatever range they want, just like when you're looking at the rest of websites and they say, what's the range of data that you want to choose? You can give that control to the user. You're the developer, completely up to you. All right, so that's probably going to do it for the content for today. Let's see what's going on with the questions. See if we've got any that came in. If none, then we'll wrap it up. All right. Morning HPH group, Lee, Antonio, and Dante. All right. Distortion. Sorry if there is distortion that came through on the video. Unfortunately, it's probably because of the stream or YouTube actually ingesting the data. Hopefully it'll clear up. Either that or it can always be my internet connection because I'm not recording locally and then uploading. We just suffer the live nature. How to prevent cascading delete without caution. G8 Oscar, you might need to clarify a little bit. How do you prevent cascading deletion without caution? Well, the one thing when it comes to, here's what I can give you until a new information pops up, if you can further clarify your question there. One thing I can say, I have a really good friend in the FileMaker development world. His name is Vince Minano. And he mentioned something to me that struck me as a little bit odd at a point in time when I was dealing with cascading deletes. And I've always, not always, but ever since I, sort of established, well, I need to see my deletes separately from the rest of my actual logical graph. When I started doing that, I can instantly see what's going on with my cascading deletes because I know that those sets of table occurrences are controlling the cascading deletes. But FileMaker, prior to FileMaker 16, it didn't have the ability to delete a lot of related records quickly. And so FileMaker has a lot of round trips that it has to take in order to make things happen for deletes. So the client has to say, okay, I'm deleting this person. What are all of the other things that I need to delete? What are all of the events that I need to delete for this person? And so there would be a back and forth between FileMaker, the client, and FileMaker server, going back and forth and back and forth. And that would take a lot of time. And Vince told me, he said, we don't even use cascading deletes. We don't set the delete option even on our database. We take control over it, and we basically say, as part of our user interface, when the user clicks a button, now you have to turn off FileMaker's own user interface of being able to select the delete up in the header area or choose delete from the menu. You have to take control by creating your own menu set or whatever, basically giving the user the only option to delete is through your button, which runs your script, is when you take full control. And when you take full control, then you can say, we're going to use perform script on server, and then over on the server, we're going to go directly to the table and delete all the related records. And that really makes sense when you have a lot of related data. If you have a record that, let's say, has 5,000 other items that need to be deleted or 10,000 other items, doing it from the client to the server is a lot of round trips. And this is advanced developer knowledge. Developers who decide to take control and want the most out of performance actually don't even use the delete related records setting on the relationship. They take the opportunity to programmatically control that by creating a script that they perform on the server, and they say, when this person is deleted, go to the events table, load all of their related data, and then just delete it. And in fact, in FileMaker 16, they released a script step that allows you to truncate a particular table or get rid of everything. So if you have a database where that database, or that one table in particular, creates a lot of records just on a temporary basis, you want to create the records, the user does manipulate some data, and then let's say you move that data into another table, but you need to get rid of all the temporaries. Being able to truncate the table with that script step, it's much faster than using FileMaker's delete related records. All right, so let's see. We've got another thing that came in here. Another question. How can we see data from table A where A is directly related to B and B is related to C? Now how can we load C table name on A? Many times it shows only the ID, not the complete name. Rana Arif, I think you're gonna, I hope I pronounce your name right, you're gonna probably have to send me a file. Doing things visually is always much easier. Anybody who's watching these videos, if you want me to go through and explain something of how to do something, the best way to do that is to create a file and then get me the file, and then we can actually go through it. Table A is client name, B is client type, and C is client balance. All right, yeah, you've got a little bit of a complex situation going on here that's very particular, that without me understanding context or the intended solution, it's very difficult to just come up with an answer off the top of my head. No, HBH group, you can definitely use cascading deletes. In fact, in most databases, cascading deletes are fine. I just separate them out into that separate table occurrence group, as we learned in today's lesson. If it warrants me actually taking the time to write an automated script, that's when I say, okay, this particular delete operation, it's not just, it's not me deleting a person then deleting a few addresses. It's actually deleting a lot of records, and doing that through the client takes more time than I want to take. I'm now going to write the script and go tell FileMaker to do it on the server side. For the most part, you're basically going to use those cascading deletes. It's fine. I just isolate them out. Lee mentions join table, so I don't know if he's probably referring to Rana's question, where we are going to learn about join tables and how they actually apply. And that's something we're going to get into in another video. All right, I'm at 45, so I think without any more questions, I think this is a good time to segue out. So I hope this video helped you out as I start up the music. And I suggest that you subscribe here on YouTube. Give me the thumbs up on any of the videos that you like that have helped you out. Next video will come up right up here in this series. And of course, always welcome to go to FileMakerMagazine.com and check out more content if you're really into learning. Until next time, see you later.